So in this deep dive, we're going to try to understand, like, what caused this recall movement, who's involved, and what it all might mean for the future of politics in Taiwan. So let's dive in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the first thing that jumps out is just how fast and how big this great recall wave has gotten. And it seems like it all goes back to a bunch of things that happened in politics right after the new legislative session started in 2024. Taiwan Plus News reported that the KMT and TPP, they formed a coalition and they got a slight majority in the legislature. And it seems like that change really set the stage for a lot of conflict and arguments.
Yeah, you're right. The Wikipedia page goes into some of the things that kind of set this whole thing off. And we're talking about some pretty big changes. They reformed the powers of the legislature itself. They passed the Constitutional Court Procedure Act. They revised the Public Officials Election and Recall Act, which is kind of interesting given the situation. And they changed how the government handles its money, like revenues and expenditures. And the page also mentions budget cuts to the 2025 national budget as a big point of contention.
Yeah, for sure. And the first reaction to all of this was the Bluebird Movement, which the DPP and a bunch of civic groups put together to try and fight back against these changes. But they were outnumbered in the legislature, so they couldn't really block the KMT-TPP coalition. So it makes you think, like, when the usual ways of influencing politics, like through the official channels, don't work anymore, where do people and opposition groups go?
Well, it looks like in this case, at least part of the answer was using the recall process. Yeah, no kidding. So let's go back to those budget cuts that the Wikipedia article talked about and the fact that the KMT-TPP has a majority in the legislature now, because that brings up some important questions about things like defense spending. You can't ignore the fact that changing how much money goes to defense could send a message to other countries.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And the transcript from Usul's YouTube channel gives us some more background on these budget talks. The hosts on that show talk about all the pressure that China is putting on Taiwan right now. And it's not just military threats. It's things like taking away residency permits from Chinese spouses who are accused of supporting unification with mainland China by force. And what's interesting is that the hosts on the O show, they make a really important distinction about the Yaya case. They say that taking away a foreign national's residency rights is not the same as taking away a Taiwanese citizen's right to free speech. The argument is that it's a country's right to decide who gets to live there, who they choose to host within their borders. It's a totally different issue legally and constitutionally than limiting what citizens can say.
That's a good point. It really clears things up about the different sides of the argument. It's not about stopping a citizen from speaking your mind. It's about the rules for a non-citizen living in Taiwan. And the transcript talks about that difference a lot. They say that censoring what they say or putting them in jail for their political beliefs.
Exactly.
So just to recap, the Great Recall Wave in Taiwan is more than just a few isolated things happening. It's complicated, and it's a reaction to specific things the legislature did, including changes to the rules about recalls and how the government spends money. And all of this is happening against a backdrop of a lot of political division within Taiwan and the complex relationship with mainland China.
And that leads to a big question for you to think about. After looking at all these sources and hearing all these different viewpoints, what does this Great Recall Wave really tell us about how political power and citizen engagement are changing in Taiwan? Besides voting, what other ways are Taiwanese citizens trying to shape the political conversation and influence elections? It's a really interesting case study in all the different ways people can participate in politics and how Taiwan's democracy is constantly evolving.
I think you've given everyone a lot to think about.
I hope so.
Well, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
We'll be back soon with more fascinating looks into current events, and we can't wait to share them with you.
See you next time.
Take care.